In this lecture, we're going to continue collecting Sysmon telemetry by adding another event ID to the mix. Before we jump into enabling Sysmon Event ID 7, I want to reiterate the purpose of the exploration phase in the blue team activities. Now there's two purposes. First, to identify telemetry gaps, and second, to identify detection opportunities. In this phase, you will spend a lot of time doing independent research to figure out what telemetry is available and how to use that telemetry to create detections. This course simplifies that process because if we spent all the time necessary on research, there would be hundreds of hours of recording, and that would just be overwhelming. Let's circle back to how we would look for command line arguments in telemetry. If I jump into Google, I can do a simple search like capture command line arguments Windows logging. And at the very top, with modern AI, we can get a quick summary of some possibilities to collect these command line arguments for Windows. Now we chose Sysmon, but just because we chose Sysmon doesn't mean that's the only solution. In fact, AI outlines another solution for us using group policy. We can open the group policy editor to enable command line arguments in the process creation events, which would be added to the 4688 events in the Windows security log. Let's talk about unsigned image loads. How will we know that we would want to look for unsigned image loads? Well, one thing we could do is we can jump back into our reverse engineering machine and take a look at the binary payload that we created and just do a little bit of static analysis. Now, one way you can verify that a binary is signed or not is use a sysinternal tool called SIGCheck. So what I'm going to do is run a command SIGCheck on the binary that we created called goodbye AMSI, which is our initial access payload. Now when you run that, you can see that this is an unsigned binary. That means it's untrusted code. Microsoft does not require code to be signed to run in the Windows environment. Let's jump back over and do a little more research. So I'm just going to go ahead. You can use Google and type in something like capture unsigned image load events Windows. And you can see there's a couple methods to do that, but one of which is using Sysmon. Now Sysmon Event ID 7 can log events when images are loaded by processes, and if we take a closer look at Sysmon Event ID 7, we can take a look at the various types of fields that are captured, one of which is this field called signed. Now that signed field will be either true or false. True if the binary is signed, false if the binary is not signed. Armed with this new knowledge, we can make modifications to our Sysmon config to capture these event ID 7s. But before we do that, let's jump into Waza and see if we have event ID 7s already. I'm in Waza and I'm going to go to Explore, Discover, where I'll type a filter in for event ID 7. I'll run this search and you can see we have not seen any event ID 7s in the past 12 hours. Next, let's jump into our let's jump into our assumed breach host where we can make modifications to our Sysmon config to include event ID 7. So I'll scroll down to event ID 7 and we have an include where we're including no image load events. I'm going to go ahead and use the field signed and we're going to include all events where signed is set to false. Go ahead and save this. Open up my PowerShell window as administrator, cd to Downloads, use Sysmon to load the new config, and it looks like the configuration was validated and updated. Now I'm just going to pop up Event Viewer, and we'll let this load. We'll open up Application Service Logs, Microsoft, Windows, Sysmon, Operational. We'll go ahead and filter the current log on Event ID 7. Hit OK. And you can see we are getting Event ID 7s. So it won't take long for these events to make it over to our Waza Manager. So let's go see if we can find these in the Waza Manager. I'm going to go ahead and switch the index pattern to waza-archives-star, and we now see we have Event ID 7s populating, and just started populating in the last several minutes. So we have successfully collected the Windows 7 event image loads, and they're now loaded into the Waza Manager. Let's go ahead and execute our initial access payload and verify that we can find that initial access payload in the events within Waza. Let's jump back into our assumed breach host. What I want to do is rerun that binary to make sure that we can capture the initial access unsigned image load events. So go ahead and go to Downloads, where we have our payload, and I'll rerun that goodbye AMSI payload, and we'll just minimize that window. Now let's go ahead and jump into Mythic, make sure we have another callback, which we do. So we've established another callback. Let's jump back over into Explore, Discover, and let's see if we can filter down by Event ID 7. And now you can see that we have Waza alerts. There's 2 alerts for that goodbye mshta.exe, which is interesting, and we'll talk more about that when we build a incident response dashboard to track our detections. But let's switch our index pattern to waza-archives-star and see if we can filter this down. Now, we're just looking at event ID 7. If you look at that, you can see that there's 55 hits. So what I'm going to do is filter down by image loaded. Now, image loaded is the actual binary that is loaded to memory, and the image itself is the image that loads that particular image, DLL or exe, into memory. So we could see an image loaded for both AMSI, the goodbye AMSI.exe, and any DLLs that AMSI, the goodbye AMSI.exe uses. So we'll filter down by data.when event data image loaded and star.amsi. And this allows us to filter down to those image loads for goodbye AMSI. Now let's expand this and look at the signed field. So event data dot signed. We'll scroll down and we passed it. Event data signed, and we can see indeed, as expected, this goodbye amsi.exe executable is unsigned because the signed property or field is set to false. Before you move on to the next lecture, make sure you can see unsigned image loads in your Waza Manager. In the next lecture, we're going to enable one more event ID for Sysmon called Event ID 11, which is the file create event.